Parliament's ad hoc committee tasked with searching for a new public protector will this week interview the shortlisted candidates for the position. The 15th BRICS summit will kick off on Tuesday in Johannesburg. And the United Democratic Front celebrates its 40th anniversary. A very good afternoon. You're coming to you live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in. You're watching The Week Ahead. You can interact with us on social media platforms. It's at Week Ahead, and our hashtag is The Week Ahead. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabalane. We start here this afternoon. Parliament's ad hoc committee tasked with searching for a new public protector will this week interview the shortlisted candidates for the position. 8 candidates have been shortlisted out of 38 who applied or were nominated for the position. However, one has since withdrawn. The interviews have been scheduled for the 23rd and 24th of August.
Candidates were filtered following a public participation process in which individuals and organizations were given an opportunity to comment on the CVs of people who had been nominated or who had applied.
The Constitution of the Republic of South Africa enjoins Parliament to facilitate public involvement in its decision-making processes. The candidates we are to interview are the product of this process. The interviews will take place over 2 days, 23rd and 24th August 2023.
The next round of shortlisting then saw that list whittled down even more when political parties were given an opportunity to make their own nominations. On the list is Muvango Lukaimane, currently an acting judge in the Gauteng High Court, who also occupies the position of pension funds adjudicator. Advocate Seliso Tipanyane, former CEO of the Human Rights Commission and currently a chief director in the office of the Secretary General of the Chief Justice. Lynn Murray, an advocate with experience as an acting magistrate. Current acting public protector, Advocate Koleka Kaleka, who had served as the deputy public protector to suspended public protector, Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane. Advocate Oliver Josie, whose positions include serving as COO of the Competitions Tribunal. Thomas Ntsewa, an advocate who specializes in, among others, the legal areas of corporate governance, personal injury, contract labor, constitutional and administrative law. Magistrate Joanele Dwaba, who primarily worked as a prosecutor and state advocate for the NPA, and Northwest University Professor Boitumelo Musenyane, who has previously held the position of investigator at the Office of the Public Protector. The committee is expected to report back to the National Assembly by the 31st of August. Abra Babia, SABC News, Parliament.
All right, for more on this story, let's now bring in Executive Director of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. That's Mr. Lawson Naidoo. Mr. Naidoo, good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. Now, different from the last time, these particular interviews are taking place at a time when the incumbent has been subjected to a Section 194 inquiry. What could be included in this selection process or just the line of questioning to avoid a similar occurrence?
Well, I'm sure that issue will be top of mind for the ad hoc committee when they interview the candidates this week. I do think that the committee must be commended for having established some objective selection criteria for these candidates. This was something that was certainly lacking when the process was conducted 7 years ago. And I think the fact that they now have some ground rules to work with, they've identified the issues of the character, the experience, the knowledge and the skills of the candidates as the critical criteria for appointment as public protector. And one has to hope that they will, when they conduct the interviews this week, will use those criteria to evaluate and measure the candidates that appear before them. So I think if they stick to that and these criteria cover, I think, the key issues and the key characteristics that one should be looking for in the next public protector, then the committee will have done its job.
Speaking of the criteria, though, there's been this great debate about whether merely having a law degree is sufficient. I'm sure you've seen this. If you are to take up the office of the public protector, should it be placed perhaps in future as advantageous to have practiced as a lawyer, given that their job involves interpretation of statutes, including perhaps being familiar with case law that would assist in investigations? Do you think it should be a criteria, or even just a legal degree is enough as it has been?
Well, a law degree is certainly not enough. It's a minimum criteria. It's one of the basic criteria one should have. I think the Public Protector Act goes further than the Constitution itself and sets out the sort of a schedule of experience that is expected of a public protector, which includes being a judge of the High Court or a legal practitioner with at least 10 years experience, or someone who has served in the public service for a cumulative period of 10 years and so on. So I think experience is a critical factor, and I think that's really something that the committee should be focusing on when conducting the interviews this week. And I think I would add to that and say that it requires someone who has experience of running an organization. The Office of the Public Protector is a large organization with a presence in all 9 provinces in South Africa. It is a large organization with a large number of staff. And so the person who is appointed as public protector must have the necessary management experience and experience of running an organization to be able to hit the ground running, but also to be able to restore public confidence in that office, which has certainly been dented through the process of the impeachment of Busisiwe Mkhwebane.
I'm glad that you talk about the restoration of just the image of the office, because, I mean, its sole purpose as the Public Protector Office is to enhance government accountability, ultimately safeguarding public interest. But that image has somewhat been tainted, whether others would say perhaps rightfully so or not, but it has. How should they go about doing this?
Well, I think, one of the issues is that the Office of the Public Protector has become increasingly politicized and some would say weaponized in recent times. And I think this is something that's going to be, has to be addressed by the incoming Public Protector to stick to the constitutional mandate of the Office of the Public Protector, as you say, to safeguard the interests of ordinary South Africans against maladministration and abuse of public power by civil servants and public servants, and to ensure that people feel confident in taking their grievances and complaints to that office in the knowledge that their cases will be looked at without fear, favour or prejudice, will be adjudicated appropriately, and appropriate remedial action taken. So that's really, I think, needs to be the focus of the incoming Public Protector, to restore those levels of public confidence. And I think the Parliamentary Committee this week can play its role in assisting in that by not politicizing this appointment process or the selection process, and really judging the candidates that appear before them on the merits of each of those candidates, and not seeking to score cheap political points.
Mr. Naidu, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's KSAC's Lawson Naidu. More news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us. The BRICS group of major emerging economies, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, will hold its 15th Heads of State and Government Summit in Johannesburg from Tuesday. Now, for a roundup of international stories, we're now joined by SABC News International editor Sophie Mkwena. Sophie, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon.
No, it's quite a pleasure to have you with us. Quite a lot happening this coming week. We've got BRICS. We've also got China within BRICS that's coming for a state visit, as we heard this weekend. There's also the Zim elections, and then there's developments in Niger. Perhaps to start with the all-important BRICS. As a start, we're hearing now, with just all the coverage, that perhaps this particular sitting of these nations will possibly lead to that re-engineering of our geopolitical architecture. Do you believe, or do you get a sense from everybody that you've interacted with, that it will be that one that ushers in this new dawn, if you will?
I think due to COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, the world is not the same. and therefore every country is scrambling for friends. And therefore, you have this interest in this summit. You look at President Ramaphosa, how he handled the summit. He has invited leaders from South-South, from the continent, and others who are literally friends of the BRICS nations. And therefore, it is a huge gathering. And we know that, for example, South America, Bolivia will be here, Venezuela will be here. You go to the island of Cuba, Cuba will be here. And then you go to the oil-rich countries, the United Arab Emirates, Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, Algeria. And therefore, you can see that there's huge interest because every country wants a friend that they can rely on. And unfortunately, the multilateral system has almost collapsed. We know that the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who will be here, when he was delivering his message at the G7 summit in Japan, he pointed out at how the multilateral organizations are struggling to position themselves in relation to what is happening now and the changes since they were launched after the Second World War, and therefore they are irrelevant. And now people are looking for alternative, and that is why people think BRICS might offer something, not necessarily competing with G20, G7, and the others, but give others a voice where
so we
they
no
can
longer
also
have outliers,
express
as
themselves.
we've heard.
Yes.
We've heard that they no longer want a system which leaves others outside.
Yes.
And that seems to be the posture that has been taken by South Africa here with that decision to invite most or all of the African countries. But we saw an update yesterday from Morocco. They decided to indicate that they have in fact declined the invitation, and they're citing South Africa's hostility over the years, particularly around Western Sahara. But then they also went on to say for them it's quite confusing because South Africa also invited a Sahrawi delegation that will be present. Talk to us about those developments there.
South Africa and Morocco is having that back and forth relationship. You know that it was South Africa that was very firm to question the decision by the AU to invite Morocco back. Also, the issue of Israel. And therefore, South Africa has positioned itself as a voice for the oppressed. And you know that the issue of Sahrawi is very critical to South Africa. South Africa, it dates back to Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma, Kgalema Motlanthe. The former leaders since the new dispensation have been very clear in terms of a need to liberate Sahrawi. And they have invited Sahrawi. Sahrawi is going to be here. And it was expected that Morocco will be aggrieved. And now it brings us to a point where you ask Morocco, if there is nothing wrong that you are doing, why you don't want to interact with others and put your point across.
They say it will be legitimizing. They say it will be legitimizing the Sahrawi delegation as an independent state. They say they cannot be in the same room.
But Sahrawi gets invited at the AU. And you know that there's a process within the United Nations, the process to admit or to accept Sahrawi. And therefore, it is personal, it's bilateral, it has got nothing to do with fairness in terms of the geopolitics. Unfortunately, I think this is not a way to go if you are a powerful nation like Morocco, because we know that Morocco is doing well. You are part of the African continent, and therefore you have to resolve your issues within the structures of the continent. And I think I don't understand the argument there.
And then on just the expansion, it's going to be quite topical. We know that China, which is on its own quest now here to become more influential, it is of the view that it should expand. Russia, we understand, also supports. India is on the fence, but we understand that Brazil is opposed to the expansion. And their reasoning is that perhaps it could diminish the stature of the group. What has been the sentiment from others around possibly expanding?
They have had different interaction in terms of different ministries built up to BRICS, and these issues have been ironed out. I get a sense that they are going to recommend that there must be an expansion, but they will come up with clear guidelines in terms of criteria, how to do that. And I suspect it's likely going to be a BRICS plus. But then those who want to join BRICS would want that their countries must be represented, and some might push that you change the name completely because you have powerful nations who want to join BRICS. For example, Saudi Arabia, with a powerful GDP, an oil-rich country, there's no way they would want to be called a plus, you know. And therefore, I think these are the issues that the leaders of BRICS will have to grapple with. The foreign affairs ministers, tomorrow morning, they are meeting to finalize a proposal that was presented by the technocrats in terms of the expansion. And now it is up to the leaders to take a final decision. But my sense is that you'll have a BRICS plus as a recommendation, and of course, clear guidelines and the criteria.
And then to China, they've decided to combine their visit and make it a state visit. It would not just be for the summit. Talk to us about what we expect to come out of the talks on just that state visit.
You know, it's historic in a sense that this is the second international trip of President Xi Jinping. He has been in his country. I mean, this year, this is the second one. And therefore, I expect him to engage the president on trade and particularly the geopolitics. You know that both countries are persuading Ukraine and Russia to engage in the talks. China did issue the first proposals. It was called China 12-point plan. You have the African heads of state and government peace mission where the president is participating. These are some of the issues that they are going to talk about. Generally, the transformation of the multilateral institutions, the issues that are related to cyber crime, and also generally peace and stability in the region, our region, you know, Cabo Delgado, DRC, you know, Sudan, and now Niger. And of course, globally, you have a lot. Palestine, it is still an issue, and of course the war in Ukraine, and therefore there's a lot on the agenda between the two leaders. President Xi Jinping is arriving tomorrow.
Now, speaking of the instability on the continent, and when you speak of Niger, what is the latest there? Because we do know that Nigeria is expected to be present at the summit, and one would assume, as ECOWAS chair, that a number of the issues there and their position on what must happen with Niger would really be topical.
Well, of course, the president of Nigeria is expected to attend the BRICS summit. Even yesterday, there was an indication that he is coming. I think he is going to use the opportunity to engage in bilateral talks with stakeholders or people who can play a role in this, because ECOWAS would want a buy-in in terms of their proposal for military intervention, because there's been resistance from the AU. And therefore, this is an opportunity to speak to the commissioner, to speak to members of the Peace and Security Council of the AU, South Africa being part of that. This is an opportunity perhaps to even engage the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who will be addressing the summit. And therefore, this is a platform for him to continue. And for that reason, I don't think the intervention is going to happen. The military intervention is going to happen during the summit, because ECOWAS is part of Africa. South Africa is part of SADC, which is part of Africa, and these leaders are talking. I can't see a situation where leaders of the continent will allow a situation where you have this kind of a gathering that's likely to shape the politics, the global politics. On the other hand, you start the invasion, which is going to be a major story. And therefore, I am confident that we are not going to see the military intervention at a time where you have this gathering. And also remember, it will be a problem, the airspace, because you know that many flights, they go around West Africa, Central Africa. And therefore, you don't want a situation where there's no peace on the continent, because this is going to lead to a regional conflict because you have those who are supporting Niger. It is going to be a proxy war. You have the
But
West
even in Nigeria, it seems Bola
Russia.
Tinubu doesn't even have all that support, because when he took this to Senate, they outrightly refused. So clearly there is that division about this, but also the perception, I suppose, of the continent. You had an African delegation going to the Ukraine and Russia to preach diplomacy, that here you should just lay down your weapons and rather communicate. And in this instance, if we're going to see an invasion, I suppose it then is something that is starkly opposite to what they went to preach for Ukraine and Russia to go back and talk.
You have to practice what you preach. The continent is of a view that all the problems of the world must be resolved peacefully. And we cannot begin to see a continent that is at war. I mean, we are already having a problem in Sudan, and you have now a proxy war there. You have a problem in Libya since the invasion. You have a problem in the DRC. And also here at, our neighbor, battling the insurgents in Mozambique. And therefore, I think I agree with you that I think behind the scenes, the question is you don't practice what you preach. If you are saying you are going to use a military alternative.
And then just in closing on Zimbabwe, they're having their all-important elections as well. And we already saw reports that some journalists were deported out, among them being Chris Moroleng. What is the latest coming out of Zimbabwe there in this said hostility?
It has been very difficult, I don't want to lie. And the sad thing with Zimbabwe is that when former President Mugabe was removed from power by the military, there was hope that President Mnangagwa, because he even fled the country, will do things differently. And I was there when he went back, when he arrived back in the country, and called for reconciliation and doing things differently. But you still have similar challenges. And now the question is, when are you finally going to get Zimbabwe right? Because what Zimbabwe must realize is that if there are these issues, true or false, they create a particular perception, and that affects investment and development. And it will affect ordinary Zimbabweans. You'll continuously see Zimbabweans leaving the country for greener pastures. And it becomes a burden to the neighbors. We saw Botswana a few days ago deporting the Zimbabweans. It's not nice. We are in one region, one continent. I just hope that something will happen post-elections, irrespective of the outcome, to have a better engagement of all stakeholders in Zimbabwe and find a lasting solution for the prosperity and the development of that beautiful, beautiful, rich country.
We'll most certainly be covering those elections. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. That was SABC News International Editor Sophie Mukwena. More news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us. Now, today marks the second day of the BRICS Business Council's discussion on various work streams. This is a platform for discussion and collaborations on energy, infrastructure, aviation, and the economy of the BRICS bloc ahead of the upcoming 15th BRICS Summit. For more on this, let's bring in SABC News economics anchor Francis Hurd, who's standing by for us at the Gallagher Estate in Midrand. Francis, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. What does day two have in store for us? Because yesterday, beneficiation was the buzzword that we need to, as a country and even the continent, not only be the people that are sending out raw materials, but finished goods, where we start playing in that value-added space.
So that buzzword won't go away. You are so correct. Beneficiation is still big, and there are discussions today about small and medium-sized businesses and manufacturing. But I can tell you that it's getting a little bit quieter in terms of those BRICS Business Council engagements. But we are here because alongside those, at Gallagher Estate, there is a BRICS Trade Fair, which is very colourful and delightful. And these platforms are manned by men and women running small businesses or big businesses in South Africa or on the African continent. The big players from BRICS are here, and the African countries trying to enter BRICS are here as well, just showing some of their wares, some of them from embassies. But I'm going to bring you something that I think you will enjoy. Let me introduce you to Simon Orimo, who is the CEO of Impala Trading. So you are a trading company, Mr. Orimo, who also trains people in KwaZulu-Natal to use leather hides. There you go, that's the company. You are a great marketing person. And you train people to take the hides and use them to make cash. I loved what you said, that these are people who think they're poor, but if they learn to use the leather, they can do so well.
Well, right now, during these challenges of poverty, job creation need calls for maximum utilization of local resources. And this includes the communal hides and skins that we have in plenty in the rural communities of South Africa. In South Africa, people keep cattle in the rural communities, they eat meat, but the hides and skins are thrown around. If you go to the villages right now, you'll find hides and skins on the roofs, but underneath the roof, there's no food, and they say they are poor, they say there are no jobs. Africa used to be known as a dark continent, but through BRICS and other initiatives, we believe this is the time for change.
So let me bring in this cushion here made of a hide, and you say it represents that. I mean, just tell me a bit about who makes these goods, where are they sold, how much do they go for?
In this, we decided to explain our excitement in that Africa used to be known as a dark continent. Though it had resources, there was poverty. But now, time has come, the sun is rising. When the sun rises, it's now shining on Africa, which is no longer dark now, it is starting to brighten up. And when this continues, yes, there are still some loopholes here and there, but the time is now for us to rise up, and therefore, Africa is no longer a dark continent as people used to know it. It is now brightening and getting even brighter and brighter. Yes, there are challenges here and there, but as it continues shining, you will find that we now get together, we put our resources together, and you'll find that as we put our resources together, you find the ECOWAS is coming in, you find the SADC is coming in, you find East African communities coming in, until we find the African Union, and as we continue growing, with others now coming, BRICS is now coming in. People are coming in from all sorts of life because the sun is rising up.
Mr.
And we
Orimo,
believe we shall end up with a world which is knitted together in business.
it is beautiful. Very quickly, what does it mean? I think you've trained more than 300 people,
yes,
right, in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yes.
So they then go and learn how to make these leather goods for themselves.
Right, yes.
What does it mean for them that you are here and that this BRICS summit is happening? What's BRICS going to mean to their day-to-day lives and businesses?
You see, I had to come here myself and demonstrate that these things can sell. Because if I train people and I cannot bring and sell it myself, then people will not take me seriously. I'll be like someone who says he can give you muti and he will become rich, and yet he himself cannot even afford a can of Coke. But I believe by so doing it in this manner, and I'm really waiting, following it up, benefiting from BRICS, not only for myself, but for all those that I train.
All right. So if you need a beautiful leather cushion, you know where to go. Thank you for those wonderful stories.
Yeah,
and let's bring in Retang Pahla from Sitsong Tea Crafters. So you're also a homegrown tea making. I mean, tell me about this business, how big it is, how it began.
Yes, so Sitsong Tea Crafters is based in Limpopo, in the rural areas of Sekhukhune. We utilize our indigenous resources to develop teas and put them onto the market. We work with rural women who have gained knowledge from their forefathers, from their great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers on the trees that grow in the landscape of Sekhukhune, the trees that can provide healing. So we've identified indigenous plants such as a black bush tea called tepane that naturally contains vitamin A, C, E, and zinc. And these women and grandfathers have been drinking these teas for many generations, but they didn't know the science of why it was making an impact in their bodies. So the science then verified this indigenous knowledge.
So what teas do you have right here?
So I've got the Tepane Black Bush Tea, as I've mentioned. It naturally contains vitamin A, C, E, and zinc. It nourishes the skin, hair, and nails. It's a natural multivitamin straight from the soil. And then I've also got the Dia Red Root Tea, which is good for detoxing the body, balancing your blood pressure and cholesterol. We've developed these two types of teas into different variants. We've got one for energy, one for flu, for immunity, for hormone balance, and then with our red root tea we've got a detox one for sleep, calming the nerves, and also just one to help you detox the body.
So I love this. So what are your volumes in terms of sales right now, and who do you sell to? So you say some African people would know this from their families, from their grandmother making this tea, but how do you get new people on board and make it bigger? You're here at the BRICS summit, so you obviously have big aspirations.
Yes, so we had to embark on a journey of upscaling the indigenous processes and mechanizing them so that we can actually meet the demand of the market. We're currently selling our teas through some of the mainstream retailers like Food Lovers Market and Spar, and we're also working on exporting these products. We've been to countries like America with these teas, we've been to Russia, we've been to China.
And are they interested?
There's so much interest that now we're actually embarking on a journey of building a new production facility, and we're doing this in rural Limpopo so that it can meet food safety, international food safety standards, and we can produce enough volumes to take it across the country.
My final question to you, the same, what does the BRICS formation mean for what you're trying to achieve and those rural women who are involved? We always talk about people need jobs, women need jobs in rural areas.
So this is giving us a chance to really sustain and develop this rural economy. It's giving us an opportunity to open new market platforms for indigenous teas like this. I mean, South Africa is the third most biodiverse country in the world, yet we only know rooibos tea, and that's what's being marketed to the world. But this is offering us an opportunity to showcase South Africa's biodiversity to countries within the BRICS network. So through this summit, we are connecting with potential distributors and buyers that can assist us in taking these teas to the globe.
All right, thank you so much. What beautiful conversations with Simon Orimo, from the CEO of Impala Trading in KZN, Ritang Pachla from Sikson Tea Crafters. And this trade fair will continue, I think, until Wednesday, and we are expecting some activity here on Wednesday. So hopefully some of those big players will get a chance to see some of these wares, many African countries represented here as well. And it's just colorful, it's beautiful, and it's hopeful, these stories about the upliftment of rural areas. Back to you.
You know, Francis, I would say that Ratanang has perfectly articulated why this platform is so important, that trade fair, to allow them to showcase some of their wares, as you've stated. Very important platform. We'll most certainly keep in touch with you. That's our reporter, anchor, in fact, Francis Hurd, that's just monitoring what's happening on the ground. More news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us.
Mansion 30. Want to go to Macca's? Can I get electric oven? C'est un petit déjeuner ou un dîner trop tard?
Dieser Zeitplan ist
Actually really reasonable.
Couldn't agree more. Hey, after this, do you want to...
Zimbabwe heads to the polls in August to usher in a new parliament and to vote for a new president. This as millions of Zimbabweans find themselves caught in a wave of inflation, unemployment, poverty, and uncertainty. Join us on SABC News as we bring you rolling coverage of the 2023 Zimbabwean elections. SABC News, independent, impartial.
We take you behind the scenes of the industry.
From new breakthroughs in science and medicine.
And introduce you to some of the big players that are shaping the future of technology.
We need a human-centered, evolution. We should use this 4IR to advance people, not to disadvantage people.
To the latest gadgets and apps that are revolutionizing the way we live our lives, this show is the go-to source. Catch Network every Saturday at 8 p.m.
The BRICS group of major emerging economies, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, will hold its 15th Heads of State and Government Summit in Johannesburg from this Tuesday. President Cyril Ramaphosa, Chinese President Xi Jinping, Brazil's President Lula da Silva and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend. Russian President Vladimir Putin will not attend in person. Now, that's due to an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes in Ukraine. He will participate in the summit virtually and will be represented in Johannesburg by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. For more on the significance of the summit, we're now joined by Dr. Kingsley Makubele of Risk Recon. He's an international and conflict resolution expert. Doctor, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. So some or many actually are dubbing this upcoming summit as that one that will put together some sort of a concrete plan to re-engineer the geopolitical architecture of the world. Are you of the same persuasion? Is this really the game changer that everybody says it will be?
The summit presents the platform for a game changer. It's the first time that you see a large number of countries that are interested to join an informal group to change the world order. So it has opportunities. What we're waiting for is the leaders going to seize this opportunity and really come up with systems that would forever change the manner in which the world function and interact with each other. The opportunities are there. You're talking about countries that are actually about 41% of the global population, 28.6 trillion US dollars that's available. These are huge economies, the 5 countries. But bringing more countries, it will create huge economies of scale.
Now, speaking of economies, so essentially right now, BRICS accounts for a quarter of the global economy. But the biggest question now for South Africa and even the continent is how do we unlock opportunities for ourselves within this group?
We really need to be very strategic in my view. One of the things that I thought at the political level there should have been a detailed discussion is the opportunity that it's presented by the marine transportation. So if we were really looking at how we want to connect Africa with Latin America and Asia and Europe, we should have seized that opportunity and start thinking about creating shipping merchants that would transport goods and services. Having said that, there's a need to unlock the potential that exists, look at the tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers that exist so that this transportation can work much better.
We've been listening for the past 2 days at the Business Council to DTIC. They've spoken about beneficiation. This is not an unusual term. We've heard it over the years where South Africa constantly speaks about industrialization and the need to play in this value-added space, that we cannot continuously be exporting raw materials and then importing much pricier goods. But somehow it doesn't seem that beyond it being a buzzword, that something meaningful is actually done.
We talk about beneficiation. Beneficiation requires serious transfer of technology. Take the gold sector itself. biggest consumption of gold, it's in India. Indians consume large number of gold, the Chinese do. We produce large quantities of gold, the Russians do, the Chinese do. Do we have the technology really to add beneficiation? That's what we should be talking about, looking into the transfer of technologies from some of our partners within the BRICS. And if we were to do that, we'll be able really to meet this target of beneficiation. Because to speak about beneficiation without necessary technologies to facilitate that, we won't realize the potential for that.
And then on just bringing in trade within the continent or on the continent. I mean, there's been that conversation that on the sidelines of BRICS, this is what will be spoken about, the need to increase trade on the continent, particularly with what we saw with COVID, that here you had a single supplier, that if you're talking about masks or anything else, you find yourself relying on a single supplier in this instance. Do you see that conversation really being one that is seriously deliberated upon?
I think as a continent, we've lagged behind with respect to the integration process. When the founders of the AU and looked into the regional economic blocs that were intended to fast-track integration of the continent, we lagged behind. If you look at the obstacle that exists, for instance, within the SADC, we still have a challenge. We have a challenge as South African to accept the truck drivers from neighboring countries to use our harbors to come and transport goods. So the level of integration is very slow. And I don't know if we understand the bigger picture. If we were to fast track, take the SADC itself, the potential of integration of the SADC that could unlock the economies of scale for the SADC area itself. It's so huge, but we are moving very slow because we are locked in the past colonial arrangement that exists within the continent. That's the biggest problem. I mean, to move from here to Cote d'Ivoire, you need to go via France, and yet you fly over Cote d'Ivoire. So those are the challenges that still exist, and we need really to deal with those issues in order to realize the potential of integration.
Are you somewhat heartened, perhaps, by the posture that South Africa has taken in its decision to invite all the African countries here for its outreach programs within BRICS, to say that we no longer want outliers, we're not going to be the gateway to the continent, we'll allow these African nations to be at the table and speak for themselves?
You know, inviting 23 countries to come and attend from within the African continent, it won't realize the potential. There's so much limited time for interaction. In my own view, what should have been done is to invite key anchor states within the sub-regions, get in West Africa, in Central Africa, in East Africa, and they will carry the aspiration of other countries in the area. It would have been much more useful. What can you do with 2 days, 3 days, and meeting such a large number of heads of state? You're not going to achieve the potential for that. We have been very strategic in our approach for that.
Your statement is quite similar to that of Morocco, because they issued a statement last night where they declined the invitation. But among other reasons, beyond citing the hostility that they say South Africa has shown over the years, they've also said the invitations were arbitrary. For them, they said they don't believe there was any thought. Everybody was just invited. But it seems that you are saying something similar, that perhaps the invitations had to be strategic, that what would this country bring to the table now?
Why did we create regional economic blocks if we can't use the regional economic blocks to reach out to greater countries in those regions? I'm saying, given the limitation of time and the limitation of time that the heads of state would have at the summit, it would have been much more useful to take a regional approach in terms of inviting people and have a prudent meetings, detailed discussion, not 2 minutes handshake and so on. That's what is going to happen. You're going to find a lot of handshake. There won't be any substantive discussion at the summit level. Remember, the summit, it's a meeting of heads of state. And the summit is a political meeting, and that's where key decisions are taken. You're not going to take decisions if you can't have detailed discussions during the process. That's the downside of a large number of people. Remember, fewer, better, but fewer. If we attended, fewer would achieve better results.
Is the Business Council not beneficial, though, where now a number of the countries on the continent are exhibiting some of their capabilities?
You know, I've seen what is being exhibited at the Business Council. Really, have we taken the best that we have in terms of our production capabilities and so on? It's good to profile SMEs and so on. I'm saying here we're dealing with $28.4 trillion business. And that requires a very strategic outlook. What do we put the best that we have in terms of our productive capability, resources that we have, beneficiation needs that we have? We should have done that. I don't see that kind of an arrangement here. We're seeing a lot of SMEs and so on. But SMEs can take as much as they can to this $28.6 trillion.
And then just in closing, the expansion is all the talk. Many are talking of possibly expanding. We understand that a number of countries have actually applied or indicated that they'd like to join BRICS. One particular country, Brazil, is not necessarily convinced that it would be beneficial to expand BRICS. They actually have gone on to state that it would probably diminish its stature as a group if they were to expand. Where do you stand on this?
I think the question, what the Brazilians are raising is that there's no clear criteria worked out for joining the BRICS. And they're quite right. You can't just invite everyone to join without making a determination as to what will be the basis of country X joining or country X not joining. Working out the detailed criterion will be very helpful. And I think people are attracted also to the BRICS because of the potential and the alternative that the BRICS provide with the establishment of the BRICS Bank. And of course, there may be perception that being a member of the BRICS, you'd easily access the funds within the BRICS Bank. But we haven't worked out the criteria. So we need to work out the criteria. And I think officials were tasked with that. I hope they've done that. When the leaders are meeting, they would then look at the criterion and see who would fit whatever spec they've come up with.
Dr. Makubele, thank you very much for your insights this afternoon. That's Dr. Kingsley Makubele of Risk Recon. He's an international and conflict resolution expert. Let's shift our focus to this story now. Today, the United Democratic Front celebrates its 40th anniversary at the Johannesburg City Hall. President Cyril Ramaphosa, the Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, and the former UDF Secretary General Popo Molefe are expected to address those who will attend the event. People from all walks of life formed the anti-apartheid movement back in 1983. It was dissolved in 1991 after the unbanning of political parties, including the ANC, SABC and the PAC. UDF veterans in the Western Cape earlier took part in a wreath-laying ceremony where the party was launched.
The UDF was a coming together of people and organizations in their different sectors across the country, because really apartheid affected everybody in every sphere of life, and it controlled people in terms of both where you could live, where you could work, how you could move, as well as the types of housing, education, or just movement. I mean, we had people, Cape Town was supposed to be a coloured labour preference place. So the result of it was that anybody else, despite being born and their forebears being in the country, if they happened to want to live in a suburb that was supposedly coloured, they couldn't, because, you know, they had to have 99-year leaseholds or so on. And so that sort of injustice, where people had first been pushed out to townships like Nyanga and Langa and so on, made it absolutely critical to work across colour lines and to realise that we were all fighting for the same sorts of freedoms regardless of the colour of our skin.
I must understand it must have been dangerous for you to be involved in those resistant movement. How was it like?
Look, I think there's a degree of danger, I suppose, but that's not the first thing that's in your mind. I think it's much more about working collectively and being able to know that ideas are only as strong as people allow it to take shape and live and so on. And so I think we oftentimes went into areas where technically you weren't supposed to be in. I mean, there were the fights where the state had organized the Vituka to try and stop people organizing in civics and so on. But even with that, I think people like Mildred Lucia, there were lots of histories, Dala Omar. We took a lot of strength from the people that were around us still to be able to shape where we were and what we were doing. And then people like Trevor Manuel, Cheryl Carolus, as I say, Wilson Sedina, Tony Gotini, they were all there, and they were there to give us guidance that we could work together. And the civic movement was one the UDF did across the country. So it wasn't only here. We organized hostel dwellers welcomes in Zile, was one of the forebears there, because people weren't allowed to live in proper houses either.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
May Ibrahim just giving us accounts of how it was like to be involved in those movements. Mama, talk to us about those years when you decided to be involved and formed these joint organizations to resist against the apartheid regime.
I joined the struggle in 1954 during the Bantu education and Bantu introduced in Elsis River. I stayed in Elsis River. We had marches. ANC did organize marches to the education department in Pero. We used to walk and march against Bantu education. That's the time I joined the ANC.
How was it like going to people who don't know the apartheid regime and also fighting against it?
Others used to say, Umlungu mkhulu. A white man is big. It's like God. Nobody will take them away.
Why did they say that?
Yeah, it's because they said everything that the white man is ruling. God, they had that belief God has put the white man to control us. But we were not controlled. I mean, we had nothing. We were not citizens of this country. We could not vote, could not have land. We were just people sitting. We could not even get work. If you are work, could not get work because the Group Areas Act was introduced. We could not get work. We were divided. They even divided our colours and whites and blacks. We could not even work in the street. You must walk on the pavement. Could not work in the street. There were curfews also, for night curfews, see a black person in streets. So we had to suffer a lot. Our parents had to suffer a lot. Could not get work. Even if you look for it, like myself, look for a domestic work, just to get a piece of bread for the children. When you walk the employer employs you, but when you go to the labor department to register you, they will look at you and look at the book, they'll say, and then they call a colored person after, take the job. So this was all part of divide and rule.
Before I let you go, when you look at the democracy that we have today and the suffering that you went through, what do you think?
I think one thing I must say, we have fought for the freedom. We've got the right to vote. We've got to work. We can go anywhere. But we are not done yet. We've still got a long way to go. Because now we must fight for the economic freedom so that we can get jobs, and women must also be in the lead in businesses.
And that's where we leave it for today. We're back next week. Do take care. Enjoy your afternoon further.